Many New York lawmakers are condemning a pro-Palestinian rally that was held at Times Square on Sunday after Hamas militants operated a deadly attack on Israel over the weekend that we've discussed at great length today and yesterday on the show. Now, this backlash toward the rally was due in part to videos circulating on social media that showed speakers at this rally announcing the number of rockets launched into Israel by Hamas, and the crowd appearing to cheer as a result. Just note, we don't have permission to air this video, but we did watch it ourselves.
The rally was promoted but not organized by the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialist of America. Card-carrying member, New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, commented on the rally, saying the bigotry and callousness expressed in Times Square on Sunday were unacceptable and harmful in this devastating moment. It also did not speak for the thousands of New Yorkers who are capable of rejecting both Hamas's horrifying attacks against innocent civilians, as well as the grave injustices and violence Palestinians face under occupation. And New York Governor Kathy Hochul condemned everyone involved, according to Politico, and spoke at a We Stand With Israel rally in Albany. Now, according to Politico, New York City's DSA steering committee member Nadia Teikolsker said the group promoted the event at the request of a coalition partner because we believe in equality and justice for all Palestinians and Israelis. We know that war will take more lives. The group opposes harming and targeting civilians, she added. It is shameful that politicians in our state are exploiting this moment to target a socialist organization and divide the vibrant left in New York. Yeah, leftists are frustrated. That's not the right word. Very disappointed and angry at AOC for making these remarks. And I can understand why. The video that we're unable to play does have a speaker at the event talking about not the death of civilians or anything that is a war crime, but talking about the value of a resistance. And as we talked at length about on the show, part of the issue is that there's been a Pied Piper effort by people like Benjamin Netanyahu to make sure that secular, non-militant groups don't have can't survive or don't exist anymore in any real meaningful way. That's probably an overstatement, but have been suppressed in Palestine, leading to the rise of Hamas, who extremists in Israel see as a good bête noire to focus attacks in the killing of Palestinian civilians that has been going on for years without hardly any notice from the mainstream media. The occupied status of Palestine has been recognized by almost every country except for America and its Western European allies. And it is true under international law that occupied peoples have a right to resist. Now, they do not have a right to target and kill civilians. The right to resist of an occupied people is still contingent on the boundaries of other kinds of international law, including prohibitions against targeting and killing civilians. And if anybody at that rally did that, they absolutely should be condemned. I mean, but that's not what we saw in the clip.
They were cheering the indiscriminate firing of rockets into Israel. It was a pro-Hamas rally. It was clearly a rally in support of the violent actions taken by a terrorist organization. It is absolutely accurate for AOC to denounce it. Obviously, okay. It was not a pro-peace rally.
It was
you can have a pro-peace rally.
It's not a pro-peace rally. It's a rally in
I know it's not a pro-peace rally. That would be appropriate to do.
Ongoing occupation of Palestine. It's not peace to return to what was going on a week ago. There are 2 million people, half of whom are children, who are living in an open air prison where not all, but some Israeli citizens regularly dump trash on raining them from the sky. Like 90+% of the water supply is tainted. There is an abundance of liver diseases because of the polluted nature of the water in the area. The entire half the population is food insecure. Half the population is unemployed. Over half the population is unemployed. And they're in an open air prison.
And a terrorist group just dragged people from their homes to be used as hostages, and these people are applauding it.
No, they don't. I just literally spent 3 minutes explaining that video, which we cannot play, does not do any such thing. Now, if there's some other part of the video that was not captured where people were saying it's good to kill civilians, AOC should and everyone should condemn that. But applauding a resistance...
I don't support Hamas's military actions, again, nor do I support the Israeli government occupation. You can be against both things, and that would be, I think, a great subject for a rally to have. That's not what they're doing.
Sitting around saying we're against both things, but we don't support people's right to resist the oppression that you say performatively that you're against is exactly the problem. And we see Hochul and the rest of these New York representatives going to pro-Israel rallies. They've never once in their life gone to a pro-Palestine rally. They've never once in their life used the words and their platform and their privilege to articulate the harms that have been ongoing against Palestinians. On the front page of the New York Times a few days ago, the New York Times used a graphic, I hope we can throw it up, used a graphic that illustrated how more Israelis had been killed over the weekend than in the last many years period, making the case about how horrible the events of the weekend were. That is true. It is also true that same chart plots Palestinian deaths, and what you can see unremarked upon by the graphic itself is the enormous volume that at any one instance, any one day of Palestinian death, at several points on the chart, dwarfs the number of deaths that happened over this weekend of Israeli citizens. Again, that is not to minimize the illegal and immoral nature of targeting and killing civilians. But it is rich to say, I'm sorry, after you have an occupied people in those conditions for years, to say they shouldn't, that there's not a desire to celebrate a resistance. The words that were used in that clip was celebrating a resistance which is legal under international law.
And now their civilians are dying, their buildings are being destroyed in retaliatory strikes. What is there to celebrate? What is there to cheer? What is there to be happy about here? I don't understand it. I don't. I think this is a very sad weekend.
That's evident.
I think there's a lot of, I think the deaths on both sides of this conflict are horrible. I think the policies of the Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu need a lot of immediate scrutiny, and I'm glad they're getting scrutiny, and they've deserved them for a long time.
Scrutiny? They've gotten the full-fledged support of the United States and all of the West.
How many times today have I said they shouldn't have that?
The White House is bathed in blue and white in support of Israel, and not a mumbling word has been said about the precious lives of Palestinians that have been lost not just over the weekend, and not just as a result of the retaliatory strike, where Benjamin Netanyahu and that leading
Some
official
people are unwilling to talk about the loss of lives among Palestinians, and other people are unwilling to talk about the loss of lives among Israelis.
Those people include people like Kathy Hochul and New York leadership, who will grandstand and condemn a speaker at an event without saying a mumbling word about the underlying righteousness of the cause of Palestinian resistance. If she had said something like that, and if AOC, frankly, who has said things like that in the past, but apparently not in this context, then they wouldn't be getting the flack that they're getting right now. Another thing I will say is that I've attended these kinds of rallies where people just will, they're inviting people from various groups up to podiums, and it's catch as catch can. I went to some rallies over after the Dobbs hearing in front of the White House, listening to what people had to say, and can be very ad hoc. I'm sure you remember during the women's protest, Madonna got in a bunch of trouble for saying something like, let's burn it all down. Something like, let's burn the White House, something like that.
She was rightly criticized for that. I mean, I'm thinking of the...
But that doesn't mean that everyone at the rally endorses that.
Obviously not.
Even though people cheered because they were mad about Trump or whatever, it's not necessarily as literal as people are trying to make it.
I think of it this way. You remember the rally? There was a rally for peace in the Ukraine-Russia conflict that some people who appeared on our show spoke at, I believe, again, my former co-host Kim Iverson.
The anti-war rally.
Right. But there was criticism that I think was deserved, not of the entire rally, but there was a pro-Russian element that was not appropriate because this should be a rally about peace. And I would similarly think,
I remember controversy
there was a Russian
around RFK
flag.
Jr. And I remember controversy around Scott Ritter.
There was controversy around a
didn't end
group
up speaking.
Who were waving like a Russian flag, who were not for peace but in support of a Russian victory in the conflict.
I don't know, man. I'm really struggling with this because, again, if there's a longer video, but the clip that we watched in advance of this was someone saying, I'm happy, I'm from an occupied people, excited about the prospect of resistance actually liberating us from the open-air prison we've been living in for generations. And this whole discourse does have the feel that even the both siderism of killing everybody is wrong. Obviously, killing civilians is always wrong, but there is a way that Israeli retaliation is considered to be justified because it is militarized, because it's wrapped in...
justified.
I'm not talking about anything. Nothing. Let me caveat. All that's about to come out of my mouth is not a reflection on anything that you, Robby, Soave, have ever said or believed. But the media coverage and the response that you're seeing from politicians seems to understand that a state... How many times do we say this? Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has the right to defend itself. But at no point, despite the clear edict of international law are those words used in reference to Palestine and Palestine's right to defend itself. And what international law makes clear is that if there has been a good faith effort for peaceful resolution, that actual revolution, that armed militant revolution is justified. I'm reading, it's historical evidence. This is from an explainer from a law school about Palestinian law. Historical evidence overwhelmingly supports that self-determination is rarely achieved without the use of force and armed struggle. And of course, we all have the right to self-determination. Failing to acknowledge resistant movements would lead to an illogical situation. Alien occupations would go unchallenged, rendering any resistance to illegal, rendering nil any resistance to the legal status itself. I mean, people have to wrestle with that. And there's going to be messiness as people celebrate after decades of inaction and decades of their own people, including children, being killed and, yes, targeted. Remember, this is a population that's literally 50% children. That this looks like a movement in some direction that's different than the status quo.
I guess I would approach it from the realm of what are the practical effects. I find it very unlikely that even being as maximally charitable to Hamas, I guess, that this is some liberatory effort. I find it very unlikely this is going to result in improved conditions for Palestinians. In fact, the immediate result is widespread destruction in Palestine.
Targeting,
so this is not a good idea.
White phosphorus, which is another war crime. Yeah, I agree. But that to me is, I feel the same way about these immigration discussions. That to me is evidence of how bad conditions are that people are willing to take those kinds of risks. I'm sorry. It's like telling. I don't mean to be this person, but it's like telling someone who's about to try to escape their slave plantation, well, if you get caught, they're going to beat you and your family and maybe kill you too and chop off your leg. Well, hell's bells. So at some point, it's worth it to flee because you don't want to be a GD slave for the rest of your life. You don't want your children taken away from you. You don't want generations of your family to be subject to that kind of oppression. And that seems, I think, obvious to a lot of people who are really wrapping their brains around the level of oppression that's ongoing in Palestine. But if you're not coming from that perspective, if you haven't been paying attention to what's been going on in Palestine until Israeli lives were the ones that were implicated in this, and those precious Israeli lives should not have been taken. Innocent civilians killing them is a hate crime. Is a
so we
war
can
crime.
we can have social change, maybe, possibly, as a result of years, decades, centuries of violent struggle. Or, hopefully, we can have social change as a result of nonviolent protest
when has that been
civil
successful?
Disobedience, and that
when
has
did
been
that
successful.
Work? That's ridiculous, Robby.
There's a history.
Nobody's sitting here saying that America should have peacefully woven signs at the British until they left us alone.
I mean,
Nobody's saying
most
that we
countries abolished slavery not as the result of a violence. Ours didn't, but most of them abolished slavery as a result of a democratic process. That is also not true. There were slave uprising. The Haitian rebellion was the killing of every non-black person on the island.
No, they didn't kill every non-black person on the island. They killed their oppressors, and very notably declined to kill the Polish population there, which stood in solidarity with their movement.
Violence among groups that dislike each other forever, or we can have.
It's only called medieval violence and barbarism when it's historically black and brown people and historically marginalized groups who are rising up against their colonial oppressors.
No, it's called medieval violence when people are being dragged from their homes and taking hostages, which has rightly outraged everyone, including AOC.
And was it medieval violence when, as we discussed yesterday with our guest, who tried to say it was barbaric for Palestinians to be keeping Israelis in cages, not realizing that the footage he was talking about was Palestinian babies in cages?
Of course it was barbaric.
But he did not. He would not acknowledge that. He would not turn around and use those words. Those words, Edward Said's entire oeuvre is dedicated to this exact principle. That Orientalism, that characterizing certain populations in certain terms has been used as a technique since time immemorial to justify harm, violence against them that is not seen as legitimate when it's against white people.
Right now, violence against a group is being justified. It is being literally justified. Violence against the Israelis is what is being justified.
Ongoing occupation of Palestinians is being justified if you strip from them
their right.
their
I don't
right
think violence
for
is
revolution.
justified. End of sentence.
I disagree with that. International law says that revolutionary action
You who thought somebody when there's
justified.
cars being stolen from them shouldn't have been able to react to that or have some conflict
what?
the person doing it, going back to in our conversations about the alleged vigilantism in the American context, I was like, no, the person should do nothing. They shouldn't resist. They shouldn't fight back at all.
What are you talking about?
We've talked about this before.
Cars and vigilante. What are you talking about?
The person in D.C. who shot at someone who was stealing their car.
Are you making an analogy of a person shooting a child because they believed they were going on a joyride? The same thing as a group of occupied 2 million people in an open-air prison?
Violent
saying after years of negotiations that have been
with
thwarted and ignored, peaceful protests, the march, the protest back, what was it, 2012, 2014, where the peaceful Palestinian protesters were shot at by IDF soldiers for peacefully protesting against the border wall. You're saying that after all of those efforts, finally there being a moment of largely, some of it was illegal and against international law, but some of it, international law validates a what's the word I'm looking for?
Some of it was
resistance from
illegal,
occupied.
downplays it a little bit, I think.
I'm happy to stay here and sit and go through the names of every single Israeli person that was killed, who was an innocent, and lament that loss of life. I'm happy to sit here and spend an hour of our airtime to do that, because I have no hesitation in mourning that. But what I'm not hearing is an equal willingness to sit in the immorality for a second of keeping 2 million people, 1 million children in an open air prison for multiple generations, while somebody who immigrated from Brooklyn or Baltimore gets to sit in their grandfather's house.
That's just not being justified on our show, at least. It's being justified by people out there who criticize them.
Well, that's what we're talking about. We do a lot of media criticism, and this is some of it.
Well, I think the media's approach to this whole issue has been reprehensible.
And I think that the real tragedy here is all that loss of life that happened on the weekend, including all the loss of those precious Israeli lives, would not have happened. And this is what the Haaretz newspaper in Israel editorial board is saying, and it was reflective of what the Harvard students group's letter also said. Would not have happened.
Would not have been solely and entirely responsible.
Would not have happened. And would not be in a situation if Bibi Netanyahu and that right-wing government were intent on keeping an occupied population in those conditions until they reached a boiling point.
Yeah.
And if you want the bloodshed to stop, if you want there to be peace in this region, then you have to address that root causes. And if you just think that bombing the more civilian populations in Palestine to smithereens, as has been happening.
Yes, I agree with that. Just as bombing and taking hostages of civilian populations in Israel is not going to solve. There's not going to be any peaceful resolution to this conflict as long as both sides are continuing to engage in retaliatory violence. So they should stop. That's true of the Israeli government. They should be very careful with what they do right now.
And they need to end the occupation in Gaza.
Of course.
All right. Well, saying that
the policy we don't disagree on.
But Robby, this is important, because Cori Bush's statement, literally 80% of it was lamenting, rightly so, the tragic loss of life of Israeli citizens.
I don't think I criticized her statement. I'm criticizing what they did at this rally and what the Harvard students said.
What was my caveat, Robby?
All right. You're not talking to me.
But she's still getting railroaded because there was like one line saying we need to end the occupation in Palestine. Don't lose sight of the ball. The reason that people are mad at this protest is not because one woman decided to get up there and say, oh, I didn't like, I'm excited about the revolution, I'm excited about bombs falling and the liberation of Palestine. The underlying concern is a shift, that public opinion will shift in a way that validates a shift in U.S. policy against the occupation.
I mean, people are criticizing the students and the activists there because students and activists are goofy, like cosplaying as Che Guevarans while sipping their lattes, and it's just like a lot of these groups
were Arab American groups and Palestinian groups. I think they have a sincere and personally invested interest, and there was a lot of black groups in there in solidarity with them. I think because of the acknowledgement and understanding of what it means to be an oppressed group in this situation. It's also
I think it's very easy to say violence is justified and good from your place of relative extreme safety in America.
I mean, I think that's really rich when there's lines of Israelis who have the privilege of getting on the plane and coming back to America, where they also have citizenship because they are part of a occupied settler regime.
Yeah.
Like that is part of what we're talking about here. It's also worth noting that Ireland, this isn't about race, white and black, Ireland was one of the only countries in the EU who was objecting to a withdrawal of aid to Palestine over this, because they also have their own personal legacy of oppression.
Why? They shouldn't give aid to Palestine. They shouldn't, just like we shouldn't give aid
should
to
be
Israel.
cut to this
I would
population.
cut all the aid to the foreign. I mean,
Okay.
it's their money, not ours, but
it's 2 million people.
that's totally hypocritical. We should not. I mean, it's their money. They can do whatever they want with it.
Humanitarian aid.
Well, I would cut all of that too.
The issue isn't humanitarian aid to Israel. Israel's not getting humanitarian aid. They're getting bombs and weaponry from America. They're getting Iron Dome funding.
Yeah. I would end all of our foreign aid for various causes, and I suspect the American people agree with me, but
all right. I don't think the American people want 1 million Palestinian children to starve or to be in conditions Israel has shut off power to the Gaza Strip.
Well, that's different. That's what they're doing. I'm just like it's our stuff. Does not belong to anyone else anywhere else in the world. It's ours.
I don't take that position, but
right,
you know,
well.
I think this was useful, because I do think it's important. I hope to give some articulation to why there feels to be a reluctance. It's all about this asymmetry that it's getting erased by a both sides are bad argument. And of course, both sides are bad under international law when it comes to killing human beings, civilians. But what needs to be acknowledged is that an oppressed people under international law does have the right to resist. And sometimes that's going to take the form of being led by a terrorist group like Hamas.
Right.
Especially when the occupying country has worked overtime to suppress any more legitimate political factions from really having dominance.
All right. Well, we got to leave it there. Tomorrow on Rising, we will probably be talking about this again. Fantastic. And in other news, we're actually bringing back an old tradition of answering your questions in the form of Rising Ask Me Anything. This is the first I'm hearing about this. You must have made this deal while I was away. You said,
this
help Robby with questions.
I'm just a contract employer. This was a management decision above my head.
No, we will look forward to answering your questions. Probably most of them will be about Dungeons & Dragons, I assume. We'll be doing that on YouTube Sunday mornings at 11 a.m.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. For those of you who like to listen while you're on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
See you tomorrow.
Take care.